Welcome, everyone. We'll get started in a few minutes, but welcome to Discovering the Benefits of Optimized User Experience, live on ServiceNow webinar. While we wait to get started, please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat with your name and your location, so we know where you're calling in from. All right, so before we do get started, this presentation may contain forward-looking statements that reflect current beliefs of ServiceNow and are based on the information available. These forward-looking statements should not be relied upon in making purchasing decisions. Also, like all webinars, these are published to a schedule of upcoming live on ServiceNow interactive events. You could scan the QR code to see that schedule, or you could visit the link that will be posted in the chat. A little bit of housekeeping before we jump in. So we are saving time at the end of our session today for Q&A with the panelists. You can go ahead and type your questions in the Q&A chat section at the bottom. Our presentation today is being recorded. We will be sharing that on the ServiceNow community. And also after the event, there will be a short survey. I'd encourage everyone to fill that out. That feedback helps us with our future sessions. And we thank you in advance for that feedback. So joining us today, we have myself. My name's Matthew Sira. I'm a senior technical consultant in expert services here at ServiceNow. My function is, of course, user experience. And with me today, I do have two colleagues, Andrew Swallows, who is also a senior technical consultant in expert services, and Eric Hemmer, who's a principal solution architect in the employee experience, on the employee experience team. Gentlemen, do you want to introduce yourselves real quick?
Hi, yep. I think you did a good job. Just UX consultant here at Expert Services. Thanks.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. My name's Eric Hemmer, and I helped start up the Employee Workflows product line at ServiceNow. I have been spending time with the more progressive customers when it comes to employee experience over the years, and most recently led the Best Employee Portal contest. So later in this presentation, I'll be sharing you some of the best examples of employee portals that were designed and deployed by our customers.
Great. Thanks, Eric. Thanks, Andrew. All right. So for an agenda, we're going to learn about UX. What is it? What does that term mean? What does that mean to me as a user experience consultant? What does that mean to you on the platform? We're also going to talk through some common challenges that we see with our customers and how we can use user experience to solve those issues. We're also going to talk about understanding our users, research, data, performing studies, lots of good stuff. Then we're going to talk about getting started with UX. How do we take the lessons learned today and how do we practically apply that to improve our user experience? Then we're going to talk through some customer success stories. And then, of course, our next steps. What do we do now?
All right. With that, we'll start with a poll. So if you want to launch the poll. And we're going to give you guys a few seconds to fill out the poll. Okay, so we got some answers in, and I created this poll, and there's no real wrong answer. It's more maybe from our perspective, you know, what is the best answer to us? And so I'm disclosing that I have a bias, right? I am about data, and my goal on this this presentation is to show you that you can't pull off an intuitive user interface or develop one without data, without gathering and talking to your users and empathizing with them. The other part that I put in here is a little trick here is I've mentioned user interface 3 times over. That's going to drive you towards one of those answers. I'm introducing bias there, making a trick question. And then the other thing I want to pull or expose you guys to is user interface is often where we start, but you can do research and UX on processes, governance, and you name it. So it's not just about interfaces. So thanks for participating. And that guy, we go to the next slide. So UX overall, though, is about the total experience. So it is going to be about that interface, but it's also going to be about what happens after, right? What happens with the process after. And it's all aspects. So this is our definition that we're going to begin with. With that, I'll hand it back over to Matt.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. So, as a designer working in the digital space, usually we think of user interface as graphical representation of a workflow, maybe in a browser, a web app. But a user interface could be anything from the buttons on an elevator. It could be your umbrella. It could be the shoelaces that you tie in the morning. So user experience touches every aspect of our lives, and we're just working in the digital space. So building for user needs, it decreases risk and it increases the probability of success. So if we're asking a user to complete a task, we use UX to make sure that it is a great experience and that they want to continue to do that task repeatedly. So some common pain points. So Andrew, do you want to talk through these first 4?
Yeah, we wanted to start off with like what we see out there when we're brought in. So in this case, we have seen feature launches where people question the investment because it just didn't come off well. Bad processes, often I'll be pulled in that there's a problem with the portal, the interface, but it might be a process underneath. So again, I'm going to hit that again, that we can research and we can improve those. But it also matters what happens, after they take action on the interface. Just lack of understanding of how to take that beyond. And so that's why I'm hitting that so much today. And then just struggling to get ideas from employees. So that's something really from a past life at a different job of, getting the innovation ideas, how to invest it, things like that. And then Matt, I think you have more items.
I do. So these are more practical in terms of a topic we'll talk about a little bit later, which is continuous improvement. So user experience is not a set it and forget it solution. Common pain points that I've seen with my customer engagements with ServiceNow. So users struggling to find content. Just because we've published content doesn't mean that users will interact with it. We need to discover the best way possible for users to interact with that content, and we do that with user experience and interviews and collecting information about how users interact with our solutions. So not being able to find content on a portal, that always results in a search first experience. I'm not even, as a user, going to interact with the interface. I'll just search for what I need. And that isn't always the best outcome. We also see with aging. So as portals age, content is constantly added and features are added without understanding priority. So it becomes cluttered and it's difficult to use. We also see teams that are supporting portals on the platform, not really having an understanding of the tools that are available to them from ServiceNow, how to collect information, how to collect statistics, what are users doing. So helping our customers develop that set of tools on platform. A lot of our customers also lack a dedicated UX resource on their team that supports the portal. So that's where we come in, helping out with that.
Yeah.
So Andrew, what you want to tell us a little bit about UX research? We've heard that a couple of times already. Why don't you tell us about that?
I will in a second, but we do have 2 hands up.
Oh, great.
So I thought we could see what people have for questions. And you guys can also submit questions in the Q&A section or in chat. I'm trying to watch chat. It moves really quickly though. So I guess allow Danielle, unmute you. Do you have a question? Okay, you should be able to unmute. You're muted right now. Okay. We'll disable, move on to the other person, Jason Turner. You should be able to unmute now. All right, we'll keep moving on. If you guys have questions, put them in the Q&A area or in the chat. Thank you. Oh, the future is not working. Okay, so yeah, please put it in the chat. I did not realize the unmute was not working. So I'm going to keep going until we see those questions. So my area, I really, I spent time as a full-time researcher. And what that means is, we're after data, but we're also trying to empathize. We're also telling a story, right? Of here's what the users are hitting, here are the pain points, and also how, what are some ideas that the users have even on solving those pain points. It's also about the types of data. So I'm going to talk more about the types of data in the next slide, quantitative and qualitative. And then it's also iterative. And there's going to be a little process that Matt's going to cover on how you continuously improve. So if we could go to the next slide, Matt. And Nielsen Norman Group has a nice little article out there that I start people off on when to use what type of user research. So this is from there. So I have qualitative and quantitative along the bottom, attitudinal and behavioral on the left side. And this is roughly, or this is kind of when you're looking at a problem, you're trying to figure out, okay, do you need to define the problem, like where the problem is, how many, how much? You're in quantitative. If you have that data and you're trying to figure out, okay, how do I fix this thing? That's qualitative. And then the other difference here, the other piece of this is behavioral and attitudinal. So behavioral, what people do, attitudinal, what people say. And what people say is an interesting one, because you may want to know how people feel about a product. But if you're asking them about their behavior, a famous example that was introduced to me when I started into the UX field was flossing your teeth, and how many people tell their dentists that they maybe floss a little more than they actually do. They stretch the truth. So that's something to watch out with attitudinal, and to recognize when you're getting behavioral. So Matt, if you'll move to the next slide. Now, data shouldn't be completely new to everybody, right? Like some of the stuff here you're going to be very familiar with. So you got analytics, web analytics, how many requests are being put in, how many views on articles or pages. If we move down here, we have survey. I like to use the employee engagement survey most companies have as an example. And then, when managers follow up, they're usually, if they're talking to their whole team, kind of a focus group or interview, they may not be very structured, but it's that kind of concept. Other things, though, that I think people are a little less familiar with, and that we try to, do more of or focus more on, is that behavioral side on qualitative, usability study and field study. So I'm going to spend a little more time on those. So usability study is testing an interface, right? And you can you can kind of sit down with employees, and you'll get a bunch of measurements. And I'll have an example slide down below of all of that. And then field study is my favorite, but it's usually a little more costly because you have to show up where people work. You have to literally show up in their working environment, and you study them in their working environment, and you do tests with them right there, rather than asking them to leave the work environment. And you also observe them over a period of time. And so that comes, it has some really good areas to challenge assumptions that in my past as a desk worker maybe didn't know about shop floor workers, right? and then the different types of shop floor I've been exposed to is like could be a desert, right? Could be a hangar bay, could be all kinds of fun things. So I'm gonna highlight those two. There's plenty more. There's many different research, but I just kind of grabbed a few of them out there. And with that, we'll go to the next slide.
Yeah, and Andrew, I just recently participated in a field study, ServiceNow customer field study, and what was really interesting was we were meeting with a user at their workstation, and while we were performing the field study and some specific tasks we asked that user to complete, another user observed, and they wanted to participate. So it was really interesting to see that happen.
Yeah, and there's pieces we won't have time to go into that have to do with your OCM, your change management. But maybe we can do that in another webinar. But that's, the fact that when you're on there and people see it and they are exposed to what you're doing and they feel like they have a say, they feel like ownership. That's another kind of benefit. So when that other user saw and came over, now you're building awareness and adoption. But I want to leave it there. That's really cool though. The next thing I want to talk about is bias. So when I asked the first poll question, I was trying to disclose that I put a lot of bias in there. I put bias to drive you towards the highest question that you guys ended up selecting, which is design and develop intuitive user interface, right? So how you even structure your questions could have bias in it. But I also just highlighted a few more biases I see, and a researcher is trained to try to remove bias. So I purposely added in the poll question to demonstrate how even a poll question could be biased. And I'm trying to be accountable and disclose that bias to you guys. We're not going to use that data in any sort of study. It's more for an example. But we do see a lot of confirmation bias. So when we do a study, people might take data that we did that resonates with them and only pay attention to that data. No matter how strong of a pattern other data shows, they may not want to mess with that. There's acquiescence bias. This is at play every study. When you're personally interviewing somebody, they're going to want to please you, right? So they're going to try harder on those usability studies. They're going to be nicer on their reviews because there's a person right there. So you have to keep that into account when you do the research, because it's not something you can eliminate completely. There's also overconfidence bias. I put this one because it's near and dear to me. I have come in, I've developed something, an interface, let's say, and I'm like, this is the best interface. This is earlier in my career. I've learned. And, I had researchers say, well, let's try some other things and test and have some comparative usability studies. And I would develop another one and spend maybe less time on it, and then we'd present it. And what I found was over and over, maybe not that I didn't learn the first time, but we started doing this more and more after this first time, is that users didn't necessarily agree with me. I was overconfident in my abilities, and that was a bias. And then the ostrich effect. So also hit this where people don't want to deal with something. It's uncomfortable. They're not confrontational. They feel like there's a confrontation there maybe, or it's just, it's just something they don't want to deal with. So they just hide it. So these are a couple biases just to be aware of, both when you're doing interviews, but also when you're presenting to stakeholders too. So both cases. But I want to introduce the fact that if you're doing UX research or you have UX researchers, they should be trained in recognizing bias, disclosing bias, and trying to reduce it as much as possible. And the reason is we want that data to be pure. We want that data to be reliable. And we also need a UX team of researchers to be trustworthy. And if you're introducing a lot of bias, you're now corroding trust with your stakeholders, right? So you have to be, neutral party basically, and remove that. So that's my bias slide.
All right. Thanks, Andrew. Yeah, so when we think about user experience, we can think about that in terms of pillars. how we can measure UX on really 6 dimensions. So first being useful. Usefulness is that the user must be able to complete or fulfill a specific task, and purposefully, intentionally. The user experience has to be valuable. It has to provide value both to the user and the business. So if we're asking user to complete a task, how quickly can we move them through that task in the most positive way possible? Sorry. It also should be desirable. So the aesthetic should be pleasing to the user. The content should be findable. So if we're asking them to click a button, make sure that that button is using a specific label that we can derive from our research that is the best possible label for that button. And the content should also be scannable, so easily scanned by the user, top to bottom, left to right. Usable as well, intuitive interface. Andrew's talked about interfaces a couple times today, but it should be as usable as we can make it, while also making it accessible. So when we think about accessibility, we have to think about users that might have assistive technology or a physical disability where they need reasonable accommodation. So that would be thinking about compliance and building our solutions in a way that make them inclusive to all users. So user experience myths. What isn't UX? So a lot of times we hear, oh, it's only interfaces and aesthetics, and this couldn't be further from the truth. So really, the difference between a designer and a user experience designer is that a user experience designer is making decisions based on information, on data. A pure visual designer is using that information from UX to make informed decisions about how to design. Another myth, UX is all about usability. While usability is key to UX, it isn't the only component of UX. And my personal favorite myth, UX research takes a long time. This can be true if practitioners are operating at academic levels or waterfall approach to research. However, it doesn't need to take a long time. Lean UX fits directly into an agile workflow or a sprint. We've seen many projects here at ServiceNow completed in a matter of days with a very quick response from participants. And we're able to take action on that very quickly. So we've learned about UX. What are our takeaways? So with UX, we act and we think with empathy. Our users are at the center. We research those user needs, their requirements, user requirements. We're using data to make informed decisions about what we're going to build as a solution. And then we also make sure that that works for everyone. So I mentioned accessibility, inclusive design. We want it to work for everyone. Then we're also continuously improving. User experience design is not a set it and forget it solution. Every time that we have, every opportunity that we have to go back and research, is our solution working? What can we improve upon? It's constant state of improvement. So how do we create an effective UX process? So first we have to think about discovery. So we find what we're solutioning for. Then we research. This is where we go into user research, collecting information about our users. Then we analyze that information so we can make informed decisions about what we're designing. Then we design our solution, design and build, depending on the solution. Then we test, make sure that we're meeting all of our benchmarks. And then, of course, implementation. And then the yellow arrow represents continuous improvement. So we can constantly be moving through a UX process. So this is the visual representation of that. But if we deep dive, so understanding the problem that we're solving for, we define that in discovery. We do that with stakeholder meetings. We do that with data that we currently have. So if we think about like ticket volume, things of that nature, Then research, creating and executing research plans to solve problems. So the methods being card sorts, user interviews, usability studies, surveys on platform, and of course, analytics. So there's analytics available on platform that we can use to gather that information. Then we analyze research reports, create customer journey maps, user flows. So we're looking for patterns in the research to provide insights into what will be a great user experience. Then, of course, we're designing that solution. So research leads us to design, where we develop that solution. Again, customer journey maps, user flows, and then verifying information via testing, user interviews, usability studies, surveys, and analytics over time, following that process of continuous improvement. So now that we understand UX at a core level, what's next? Andrew, you want to speak to evaluation on the platform?
Yep, and we had someone in the chat ask about this, and kind of a Q&A kind of around what is some platform capabilities. So within the platform, there are your performance analytics. These are going to get your quantitative behavioral data. User experience analytics is its own little module, and you can define custom events. And this is really web analytics. And you can also do, funnels and different things to kind of track, how people are using your portal in that case. But I think it also works for mobile and workspaces and things of that nature. So you haven't checked out the user experience analytics. That's one thing. We have the performance analytics, and then different areas have their own little analytics, such as the AI search there. And so there's a lot of analytics, right? And when I started and said, hey, you guys might know some things out there already. Lots of analytics, lots of data, lots of reports. There's also a survey tool in there. And I know EC Pro kind of came out with like an even bigger survey deal where you can get it injected into your services. And so there's a lot of things around the quantitative, right? The quantitative area has a lot of different reports. So if we move to the next slide, I'm going to resurface that graph from earlier. So it really depends on what you're after. So you kind of look at your business problem, and you look at the data you have, and that should drive, what you need to do. So you should have a lot of analytics to look at and figure out where some problems might be, right? But you could do other items. You could do the survey. Once you've kind of determined maybe something out there, or you could also use it as discovery, exploratory. You have, qualitative items as well. And the qualitative items aren't going to be something that's in the platform, right? That's something that is just done kind of, with researchers. So you can do the interviews. Interviews are great for processes. I didn't really cover interviews much earlier. But I did mention that you don't just have to do interfaces. So when I look at like a service blueprint or a customer journey with a service blueprint, which is what we did quite a lot of in my last company, that's primarily through interviews. So structured interviews, again, trying to remove the leading questions like my poll earlier, and trying to really get to the truth of, how could this process improve? How could the service improve? So if you're looking at that, I'm going to point you in the interview. If you're doing an interface, usability study is the #1 choice, right, for getting a lot of behavioral data. And that's the other thing to keep in mind. An interview is always going to be attitudinal, right? You can look, though, if you have a workflow, you're going to have analytics to see what that behavioral is. So you're trying to come up with a holistic picture to data drive those decisions. And to Matt's point, I'm mentioning, there's all these studies. They're options. You don't do everything for every problem. So you may not, you don't have to spend a ton of time. You can do a usability study in 2 weeks. Interviews, same thing. Again, field study is a little heavier because you would actually travel to the location and spend all day with your research. But that's kind of, I wanted to cover like what is in the platform and what are the gaps that you may want to think about filling, which is over here on the qualitative side. All right, and then this is an example of usability study. I wanted to bring this in. This is, I did this for a customer here at ServiceNow. Got their permission to use it and show other customers. So here we are. And to give you an idea of what a usability study is, I think it's easier to visualize. So here I have patterns. So I have strong patterns, moderate and weak patterns. And it's based on how many participants said, created a certain type of pattern. And you do that as a researcher, you're looking at what they say and do, and you're taking notes, and then you're comparing across all of them. And you're looking for those patterns as you go. In this case, I had 2 demographics. So this was, it actually was 9 people. Try to get 10, 5 in each demographic is roughly the number. So you can see I can do success rate based on the demographic. I can do time on task. How long did it take them to finish a scenario? Because usability study is a bunch of scenarios. So in this case, I had 5, and I'm running all the participants through the same scenarios. And I can track that, especially with Zoom, when you get the permission to record. I mean, it's very easy to get your time on task and see that. And then I mentioned earlier, part of the job is empathizing and telling a story. So taking those direct user quotes, rather than coming from a researcher or a subject matter expert, if you actually get user quotes that come in and actually helps tell the story and helps stakeholders empathize, right, and understand the problem. So in this case, their number 1 problem was multiple portals and bouncing between the 2. Many other items, and I listed them, but this is a quick screenshot of just an example study that we did. All right.
Thanks, Andrew. Yeah, so I mentioned accessibility earlier. So yeah, a key tenet of UX is accessibility. And the reason why is if we wait for users to report a failure, so a user who's using a screen reader, they're unable to use an accordion in a knowledge base article to view expanded content because it doesn't interact with a keyboard. I can't use that feature. If we wait for the reported failure of that feature, it can add months to a process. So if we're on a quarterly publishing cycle for our work, it might take two, 3 cycles to get that fixed. So if we're testing ahead of time, we can eliminate that entirely. So introducing accessibility to testing and your development processes is key. It's a key tenet of UX. That should be a checkbox for your definition of done. We're testing against WCAG. We're testing against Section 508. But the platform, ServiceNow platform, out of the box is both Section 508 compliant and WCAG 2.1 AA compliant. So as we're working in the platform, as we're making changes, as we're introducing branding and colors, knowledge-based content, we need to continue testing. As we've mentioned multiple times, continuous improvement, always looking for areas of opportunity to make things better. But most importantly, if we think about accessibility, it's just the right thing to do. All right, so I'm going to pass the floor over to Eric. He's going to show us some example work, his work with ServiceNow customers. Eric, welcome.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much. It's fun and interesting to hear you and Andrew talk about the different aspects of UX design. As I mentioned, I've been afforded the opportunity to spend time with our more progressive customers over the years. And for many years, it was the unification of different service portals together, them asking us how to do that to simplify things for their employees. And then 6 years ago, it was actually August 2018, is when customers also began to ask us if they could use ServiceNow to replace their traditional or legacy intranet portals as well. When I led the Best Employee Portal contest, it was evident from the very beginning that all of the finalists and all of the winners really emphasized user experience design research. In some cases, they had their own UX professionals in-house, and they leveraged those people to conduct the workshops and the tests and the surveys and all those things. In other cases, they worked with our expert services team. In some cases, they brought in partners who had those types of research, but it reinforces the notion that to create a world-class employee portal experience, you have to do the UX research. Now, Vertex Pharmaceuticals, the one that you see here, you can see the quote there from Kim Rose about really emphasizing UX research. They used human-centric design thinking in their approach to designing their portals. And then you can see the impact that that has had, a 93% HR case deflection. I mean, that's really unheard of. I've seen customers get to 80%, but I've never seen one get to 93%. And that means it's not only designed well for the employees, but it's also been promoted really well. So employees always know where to go to self-serve. They also had 68% IT incident deflection rate, 92% IT satisfaction scores, and 8.5 million views since their launch. This is a small company. This is not a big company. So making these portals attractive and popular and also very useful, where people can trust the results, is a key to getting those types of success metrics. Let's go to the next slide. Here's another one. This is Rocket Companies. The people in the US would probably know them better as Rocket Mortgage, but they also own other businesses. For example, they own the Cleveland Cavaliers NBA team. This was one that was actually led by the communications team. So I have seen people in different roles, whether they're in IT, HR, or even communications, recognize that there is a problem and want to do something about it and align the different stakeholder groups. In this case, this is their new modern intranet portal. And they also did a lot of design work, a lot of surveys with different groups of people that they categorized into different persona groups and whatnot. And the amazing thing about this is when they went live with their Rockworld portal, their self-service rate went up by 10x. It was closer to 15x, believe it or not. And that was simply because they were unifying everything together. So the same place where people began and started their day to get personalized news, information, and announcements was the same place that they would go to self-serve to get answers from IT and HR, as well as services and support. Before this, they had basically forgotten that there was an ITSM portal. You might have learned about it during orientation, and then they forgot about it. So by unifying these things together and designing it with employees, for employees, can get you a huge value increase in your investment in the portal in ServiceNow. Let's go to the next one. Okay, this was one of the very few winners that was actually a single departmental portal. This is a large US bank. And what's interesting here is that this is their IT portal. It's using Employee Center Professional. They also use us for HR, and that happens to be a separate portal for now. They are going to unify them together in the next year. But the IT team really did emphasize user experience. Often I see IT as the ones, just to generalize here, who don't care about user experience as much. A lot of times HR and communications understand the value and impact of UX design research. But in this case, IT really emphasized that. They worked with their employees. They're using the communications features of Employee Center Professional to attract a lot of people to their portal. So this bank has about 100,000 employees. They're getting about 43,000 average monthly visitors. That's a lot more than you would expect from a portal that's just reactive and waiting for somebody to come and use it when they have a problem. In that case, they would only have employees coming there once or twice a year. Here they have almost half of their employee base coming every month. And what that's done is it has allowed them to save their organization $2.4 million per year, because the self-service rates, again, are going to be so much higher. And they found out what services employees most often had issues with, right? That's part of UX design research, looking at the analytics and feedback. And they automated a lot of those services. So now employees can come in here and they can run a self-diagnosis on their laptop, and then they can run self-fix scripts like restarting Citrix, for example. Okay, let's go to the next slide. think we have 2 more. Now, Visa here, one of our finalists, they have their own in-house UX designers and researchers, and they've really leveraged those people to create a few different phenomenal experiences. What you see here is a thumbnail of a portion of their employee portal for HR. They also have a pre-hire portal, a separate portal that they made just for pre-hires to go through the onboarding process. And they have done so much research that you can see the phenomenal statistics that they're getting there. 99% of new hires feel prepared on the first day. And you can't really get better than that, honestly, not realistically. And over 99% feel valued as an employee. This is true engagement. And this is making sure that these designs are useful. It's guiding people through the things that they need to do. It's intuitive. It wasn't just some practitioner, let's say in HR, saying, here's what I think people need. No, this was their UX researchers working with employees and new hires to ask them, what do you need, right? And then designing the portal experience to be intuitive and help them through all the different phases of these particular journeys. Let's go to the last one here. Now, before I talk about this one, I just want to bring everybody's attention to a link I put in the chat a little while ago. The link to in the chat is for the detailed report of the Best Employee Portal contest. It is a 32-page PDF full with lots of really practical ideas and best practices that all of these contest finalists went through. Not just UX research, but also how they promote their portals, how they use feedback and analytics, how they structure their governance teams so multiple stakeholders can use the same experience for their employees. This one here is very striking, and this is Paramount. They actually replaced 20 different intranet portals with this Murray portal when they launched it. Murray is the middle name of the founder of Paramount. They refer to it themselves as a consumer-grade experience and bleeding-edge design. Now, they spent 6 months designing this before they even started talking to companies like ServiceNow and others to see who could actually help them fulfill their vision. Ultimately, they selected us because we can provide that hyper-personalized experience, and we have such a flexible UI. You can leave ServiceNow out of the box. We do a lot of design research before we create our baseline portal, but you also have the ability to rearrange it, to augment it, to change the themes, or in their case, they started from scratch. But look at even the frequent actions widget. It's made to look like a film strip. That's very intentional for Paramount. So you really do have a lot of flexibility with that UI, and depending on what you aspire to deliver with your employees, you can meet that aspiration with our technology. Okay.
All right, thanks, Eric.
I'll turn it back over.
All right, thanks. So what's next? So we've learned about UX. We've talked through research. We've talked through accessibility. Eric has shown us some great customer success stories. So what do we do now? ServiceNow does have an accelerator as a part of Impact, a user experience accelerator that you could leverage. There's user experience courses on the ServiceNow training site. You can use your learning credits on Now Learning for that. But of course, from expert services, I'm predisposed to side there. But ServiceNow does have, as a part of expert services, a full suite of UX services that you can leverage. And you can learn more about that on the ServiceNow expert services community. But that does take us to the end of our slide content. Now we're going to move to the Q&A section of our presentation. So Andrew, you've been monitoring that, haven't you?
Yeah, we got a couple questions that I answered. We can open it up as well. I guess I was told if I hit allow to talk, you just have to unmute yourself. So if you raise your hand, I'll try Daniel here. But if you raise your hand, I'll unmute you, and then you can ask your questions. Or you can type it in if you want to do for the questions. So I will cover maybe some of the questions I have answered too, just to highlight those for the recording. There aren't any tools inside ServiceNow that do research other than, what was mentioned, the surveys and the analytics. So as far as doing time on task on usability studies and stuff, there are tools out there. Constant debate on which one is best for which type of research even. But that is not in the platform. That will be from the research team. Someone mentioned that they're going to be doing workflows and just starting with their journey. I did mention that Employee Center Pro, which is his own license, and it's what I primarily focus on, does have the ability to insert surveys throughout a service workflow lifecycle that came out in February of this year. Again, it's a license though. So if you don't have that, or even if you do, honestly, the other thing to look at your workflows and often your services is a customer journey map, which is usually built off a series of research. Could be a lot of interviews. Interviews is kind of the staple. Could be design thinking sessions, which are somewhat like a focus group. But there's design thinking you could bring in for that as well. And then I often like, in a past life, I liked bringing a service blueprint, if you're familiar with service blueprints and the stages of delivering a service. And I like to line that up with a customer journey map up top. So you got what the user sees and what makes them, where they're finding their frustration. And then you can look below the surface at what happens in the service at that time and what is causing that pain point, or a combination of things. And then how to, where to focus your effort to fix that issue. So that's a couple questions that have come in.
We have a hand raised from Antonio.
And
You
it
have
looks
to
like
unmute yourself
unmuted.
to verbalize your question. And the mute button or unmute button should be in the lower left corner of your Zoom.
Yep, I see the mute button coming off and on, so it's on right now. And interrupt me, don't go if you, but I think folks are enabled to talk. I was also asked about, we got some questions coming in here too. So I think this one is for you, Eric. When will the PDF report of the portal contest come out?
Oh, yes. If you scroll back through the chat, you will see that I put a link in there. In fact, I'll just put it back in the chat again. The detailed report for the Best Employee Portal contest is out. You can access it. You can download it. And I'm just going to go ahead and put that link back into the chat here so everybody has it. This should be a very useful report for every customer who aspires to deliver a phenomenal employee experience. If you plan to compete in the 2025 Best Employee Portal contest, then I would highly recommend that you read about all of the different things last year's winners did and try to incorporate some of those.
Right. And then another question, I think, for you, Eric, is are the examples you given built on Portal or Employee Center or both?
Yeah, great question. I was wondering if this might come up. So the truth is, every portal on ServiceNow is built using the Service Portal Technology Framework. And you cannot look at the user interface of a portal and determine, well, what entitlements did this customer have? Not necessarily. I think of Employee Center Professional not as a portal per se, but as a suite of functionality that helps you bring the portal to life in order to populate it. It's things like content publishing for authoring and targeting and scheduling content. It's campaigns for those omni-channel, multi-phase informational campaigns. It's app launcher, so you can give them single sign-on access to the applications they're entitled to. It's approvals hub, so you can aggregate approvals from many different systems and present them to take action on them in ServiceNow. But just looking at a portal, you can't really tell. So even Paramount, they created a new portal. I think every widget they created was probably ones they created themselves, new widgets. But they're populating a lot of their news and other things like that using the features of Employee Center Professional as well as audiences for that personalization. So there are right ways and wrong ways to, let's say, customize the portal. We actually go into that in the additional resources of that report in that link. But the truth is you can have out-of-the-box widgets, great. You can change a lot about them using CSS, for example, and you can rearrange them and all these different things using service portal configuration. The only time you get in trouble is when you actually modify the code of an existing widget, in which case then if ServiceNow updates it later on, you may have to evaluate a conflict during your upgrade. But the compromise there is that you can clone a widget and make the changes you want to your copy of it. And ServiceNow will still continue to update the original. And then you can always revert back to the original if you like something that we've done. So there are right ways to create a tailored custom experience. And then there's wrong ways. And any new widget you create is always safe because ServiceNow will never touch some new widget that you create for yourselves.
Yeah, and then our end on expert services, we focus primarily on EC and EC Pro. Portal's still out there. And the other thing is it's, the Employee Center is built on top of Service Portal. So they're kind of very similar, or like intermixed, right? So Employee Center just adds more on top. All right. Got another question about sample questions for focus groups. So focus groups and interviews, usability studies, you're going to build that around what are you trying to solve. So the first thing you want to sit back and say, what is the problem we're trying to solve? And then you're going to build them around that. So there might be examples to take inspiration off of. We can look for out there in the wild, but you're going to tailor that specifically to that problem. So hopefully that helps there. So is EC Pro included in ITSM Pro? I don't believe so. We're not licensing. That comes with, I believe, some HRSD license, or it's a standalone right now. That's I think how that is. But probably consult your licensing expert on your account. Great. Any other questions? All right, if not, we can go to the last poll. The poll doesn't allow a free-form text, so I'd really love it is if you don't, if you have more ideas than these three, please put it in the chat. We'd like to capture that. We'd like to figure out what we want. You are our users for the webinar, and we want to know what you guys want, and we want to tailor to you guys. So please use the chat if these three examples, you have another idea to put in there. And Matt mentioned in the beginning, there will be a survey that comes out in the end. Definitely helpful if you fill out the survey. We're all about data driving things. So the survey will also help us, figure out what next steps, what you guys want to hear about, if you want examples, etc. And it does seem like examples is the highest, but pretty good distribution there. And next highest is how to conduct user research. Okay.
All right, and that brings us to the end of our user experience webinar today. So thanks to everyone that joined. And as we mentioned, please complete that end survey. We'll also be publishing the presentation to a recorded version of the presentation to the community page. So please keep a lookout for that. So thanks, everyone.
Goodbye.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Andrew.
Yep. Thanks, Matt. Excellent.